All right. So, the wonderful world of medical, legal, and ethical issues in EMS. Seems like an easy topic. In some ways it is. In some ways it's actually very complicated and very in-depth with it. Depends on how much you really like law and reading that kind of stuff. But very important part of our everyday job with this. So we're going to go over scope of practice, consent refusals, and then we're going to talk about some other legal issues like negligence, competency of like adults and children, how we obtain refusals and things like that with children. So, scope of practice. Does anyone know what scope of practice is?
What you're legally allowed to do.
What you're legally allowed to do, yep. So it's kind of what you're supposed to do. So it's the regulations and ethical considerations that define our scope or extent. So basically, your Vermont state protocols, that's our scope of practice, okay? So it's, as you can see, it's defined by state registration, regional rules. So we have a set of laws from the state of Vermont that says we will do this, and then the EMS board, which is usually made up of EMS providers, the district medical advisors, and then also Dr. Wolson, who's our head our state medical advisor. They look at research, they write the protocols, that's our scope. A lot of times it's based on, our scope of practice, like the state protocol scope of practice will it'll outrun the national scope of practice. So for some reason it takes longer to update the curriculum for scope of practice at the national level, where states typically move ahead quite quickly. So like EMTs are currently giving nebulizers now in the state of Vermont. That's not in the national curriculum. But the state has come out with, all the research shows the benefit to EMTs being able to listen to lung sounds, interpreting wheezing, giving an albuterol treatment, and making the patient get better. They've determined that there's more good than harm for that procedure, so they've listed it down to the EMT level. So, standard of care, it's what's expected of an EMT with similar training when caring for a patient in a similar situation. So it's, if one EMT would do it, then you should do it also. Does that make sense? It's kind of one of those things where when you start running into, this is where you kind of can get caught in the negligence side of things, where if an EMT, the standard of care does not get met for a certain patient, negligence could be possibly proven at that point. We'll talk more. There's like 4 different factors to proving a negligence case, and we'll talk about that later. So scope of practice is what you can do. Standard of care is how you should do it. Any questions on difference between scope and standard of care? Yeah.
Do you have an obligation when you're off duty?
Good question. Wait about 20 minutes, and we're going to talk about all that stuff. It is in here. You're talking about the duty to act, yes, and Good Samaritan laws. Yeah, that stuff it's later on in the presentation.
Okay.
So let's talk about patient consent and refusal. Just off the top of your head, does anyone know the different types of consent out there? Implied. Implied is one.
Informed.
Informed, yeah. Informed kind of goes along with expressed. So.
Legal age.
No, legal age isn't one.
No, I wouldn't know.
Wow.
I didn't mean
Express consent must be informed. So you have to explain to the patient what's going on, what you want to do, and then they give you expressed intent. Yes, I want you to help me. Because you've informed them of what's going on. So it's an informed consent is expressed consent. Implied consent is assumed consent. When would we deal with, what's the difference? When would we apply implied consent?
When a patient's unconscious.
Yep, an unconscious patient. Because the way it works is any reasonable adult would expect help in that situation. That's how implied consent works. So if you're unconscious, a reasonable person would want help. So it's implied that you can help them without actually getting permission to help them.
LOC and intoxication?
Yep, intoxication is definitely one of those, can be implied. Intoxication gets tricky just because of, with an unconscious patient, you're not dealing with someone that's necessarily fighting, where an intoxicated patient you get behavioral issues alongside it by forcing them to do something. So it can get tricky.
What if a patient was trying to commit suicide and they're unconscious?
Well, if they're unconscious, implied
It
consent
doesn't
is there.
matter?
Yeah.
Either way?
If
Okay.
you're unconscious, then if they're not dead, then you should be, even if they are dead, you should be treating them at that point. It's an implied consent.
You guys have that law out here where, like in Vegas, if they think you need medical care and you're refusing it, a cop, social worker, or a nurse can have you like under.
Yeah, they call it protective custody.
Yeah, it's like for 72 hour, 24 to 72 hour watch,
So
depending on the
that's
severity.
so that's a psych hold. Police protective custody is different than the psychiatric hold.
Even on some medical calls, they have it out there.
Yeah, so you might not be held for 72 hours, but police with a warrant, they have to get a court order for it,
Okay.
can place somebody in protective custody, and that patient doesn't necessarily get held for 72 hours, but they have to go to the hospital at that point because the cops will make them. They get to make the decision. We're going to talk about that again later on. So, any other questions on implied? Yeah, sorry.
Mental capacity, special needs, someone that's obviously not quite there.
Yep.
Is that allowed? I mean, that's implied, or I gotta get someone who knows them to give me consent?
It's a gray area.
Yeah.
So, depends on the age.
Yep,
Obviously, under 18, you're going to need parental consent, and we're going to talk about children next.
yep,
If they're over 18 and they're adults, it's going to be dependent on a lot of things, because a lot of people that don't have a mental acuity to maybe live by themselves, they typically have a state guardian.
yep.
So sometimes the state guardian has to be notified before decisions can be made. However, with life-threatening issues, such as like heart attacks, strokes, things like that, sometimes in that case you can use implied consent. And this goes with kids, again we're going to talk about it in a minute, if a reasonable parent would want their kid transported and treated for a life-threatening injury. So that's it's a very gray area. And you can see that there's going to be a lot of gray area when we're talking about this stuff. So, but please keep asking questions so we can understand as much. So children and mentally incompetent adults. So obviously minors, you can't sign off. They can't refuse treatment. They can't sign off. They can't sign themselves off. You had a question. I am sorry.
Do not resuscitate orders factor into your consent process at all?
Yes, and once again, there's a whole section on DNRs coming up at the end here.
Okay.
You're like way ahead here, man. You're thinking way ahead. That's good though. But minors can't legally consent or refuse. You need to get a parent to sign them off. There are some exceptions to that with emancipated minors and those that are serving in the military. Because at 17 you can sign a contract with parental consent to serve in the military. So that can also emancipate you from your parents and allow you to make those decisions on your own. But an emancipated minor would be a female that's pregnant that has her own child that's 16. That can be considered an emancipated minor and can make decisions on her own. Yeah, you can leave. So that's kind of how with the children. So what do you think, which age range of children do you think are the most complicated to sign off?
Teenagers.
Why?
Because there can be gray area from time to time. They look like they're an adult, and they act like an adult. 17 years old.
Yeah,
It's
but obviously when we're talking, Garrett will cover this next week with documentation. Obviously we're always getting date of birth, so you're going to know patient's age. There's a little bit more to that, so why would they be complicated to sign off?
Because they can lie.
They can lie, but typically 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, they can be out with friends, right? They're out riding bikes, driving cars, hanging out with buddies. Parents aren't around, right? How do you get a sign off from a 16-year-old that just crashed his car into a tree that doesn't want to go to the hospital?
A lot of phone calls.
Phone calls.
But if they're a minor, don't you have implied consent?
No.
Depends on the injury.
Only
If they're
if there's
conscious.
life-threatening injuries. If they're just banged up, bruised up, and don't want to go to the hospital, you don't have any right to take them. There has to be there has to be some sort of life-threatening injury for you to assume implied consent with a minor. And that's the gray area. What is a life-threatening injury? How do you prove a life-threatening injury? Yeah.
Question, what if the minor wants to go to the hospital, but the parent doesn't want them to? What would you do in that situation?
Good question. Again, you gotta get consent. If there's no life-threatening injury, you have to get consent to transport the patient. So, I'm sorry, I'm horrible with names, so it's gonna take me forever to learn everybody's name in here. What was your name?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, ignore it. Just FYI guys, my left eye, just ignore it. Pay attention to this eye. I'm actually blind in my left eye, so I don't see anything out of it. So, if this is looking over here, just ignore what this is doing and pay attention to this one. But the maroon shirt. Andrew. Sorry, it's gonna take me a while. Phone calls. There's nothing saying that you can't call mom or dad up going, hey, your son was in an accident, he wants to go to the hospital, are you okay with that? Yes, please, take him to the hospital. Cool, you've got verbal consent. And then when you go to document it, you document that I talked to mom at this phone number, and she gave verbal consent to transport this patient to the hospital. That's legal. That is, you can get verbal consent. Just like we get verbal orders from doctors, we can get verbal consent from parents. Just like you can get verbal consent not to take them. I've done that before. I would make sure you have a witness, like make sure a police officer or somebody that's over 18 that's on scene signs as a witness for it. But you can get, hey, I've done it multiple times. Hey mom, kid's okay, doesn't really want to go to the hospital. He's not hurt, he's got a little bit of a bump on his arm, he's got a little abrasion, but he's perfectly fine, doesn't want to go. Are you okay with that? Yeah, sure, where are you? I'll come get him. Perfect. So you can either wait, get a sign off from mom when they get there, or you can just take a verbal. Again, document the living hell out of it. Like, I talked to mom at this number, at this time, this was mom's name, this is her date of birth. Like, get that information from her and put it in your run report. So it's fully documented.
And would that work the same way if the parent doesn't want the child to go, but the child wants to go?
So if the parent doesn't want, but the child wants to, you have to listen to the parent. Parent rules in this case. Again, unless they're emancipated minor, or in some cases, if they've signed a military contract and are currently in the military.
Aren't there like reproductive rights for some people in their teenage years that they don't have to get parental permission for certain medical treatments?
Not with what we're dealing with, I believe. I do not know of anything that would preclude someone from refusing care on that end of things. Because we're talking emergency medical, and I could be wrong.
So, just to, if I may,
Yeah.
having worked on this piece of law recently, if it is connected to a reproductive issue where, say, a 16-year-old receives a legal abortion, is having complications, calls an ambulance, and does not want it disclosed, they're within their rights to prohibit you to speak to their parents. Because the medical procedure itself did not require parental consent.
Okay.
So if it is a complication derived from a procedure that did not require parental consent, you are not allowed to speak to the parents without the patient's consent.
Okay. Well, good to know. I did not know. No, I'm happy you bring this up because this is great. Because this book deals with overarching generalizations across the U.S. State laws narrow this subject down. And we'll talk about a little bit more narrowing stuff. I was not aware of that law. Thank you for bringing that up, actually, because, hey, now I learned something today.
Yeah, it's a piece of niche.
Yes, but it's something that it's one of those areas that if something happened, if I was to go on a call for something like that right there, I'd get in trouble because I did not know that. So I'm super glad you brought that up because now I learned something. Now I'm going to go look it up and I'm going to tell everybody else here, like, hey guys, just FYI, You know, if this happens, don't do this. So last thing we all want is ever to get into a lawsuit. And that's why we talk about this subject right at the beginning, is these issues come up. Morally, ethical decisions every day come up in the job. So
Let me get this clear. So hypothetically, you have a 16-year-old minor female that goes to get an abortion on her own accord. Parents don't have to be told.
correct, in the state of
Okay,
Vermont.
Gotcha. Now, during that procedure, something goes very wrong, and that young lady all of a sudden has like internal major bleeding or something like that, that facility can't handle, they call an ambulance.
Correct.
So if she says, I don't want to be transported or medical, isn't that a life-threatening thing, and that's already applied?
So it would be life threatening at that point, but if she's still
she wants to go, but she doesn't want her parents to know.
right, at that point you would just tell her that you would inform her that we will not talk to your parents, we will take you to the hospital, this will be totally between the ambulance crew and you, nobody else sees the report, no one else has a right to see the report. So, as I'm understanding the law, that would be correct, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
except here's where you're
That's
gonna dive
fine.
into like a specialty of law that, in that case, at the clinic, she's a protected patient with her own authority. In the ambulance, she's a patient with her own authority. At the hospital, she's not.
So once he crosses the threshold of the hospital to get treatment from a doctor.
So the
or
hospital will
whatever,
have to call mom and
doctor
dad
has
to get
call
permission.
mom and dad.
Is that just an oversight of the law, or is
It's
it?
not, because there can be
There's insurance issues
complications outside
probably.
of that, it comes down to insurance.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah, not to mention the fact that she dies.
well, no.
Sounds like you're gonna
We'll
be
get you the stats
doing
on
a
a
lot of
different day.
convincing.
Yes.
It's just, it's a really complicated area of law when you're dealing with teenage-aged individuals and you're dealing with reproductive health issues. So, I mean, my instinct by far every single time would be to call a medical director and make it their decision, not mine.
Yes.
Because not everybody has spent a couple years in the minutia of case law and state
Yeah,
legislation
exactly.
on it. Nor could that be expected. But if it seems like a gray area, don't make that your decision.
Yes. Felicia hits. Oops.
Solve the problem, go to court.
And it may not be
Don't let it
just
drop.
like necessarily an abortion, it might be like,
An IUD.
Yep.
yeah, it might be anything related to reproductive rights.
Yep.
Maybe they're pregnant and their parents don't know they're pregnant, and they feel like they're having some sort of medical issue and they call and,
That's actually not within the bounds of the law.
okay.
But Felicia brings up a great point, though. When there's that gray area, if you're doubting the decision, there's some little bit of a doubt, call medical direction. Put it on their shoulders. Give the docs give them the full play-by-play of what's going on, what you've done. Put the decision on their shoulders. That's why they get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. They are supposed to understand these laws and all this sort of stuff, and they can help you make that decision. So always consult medical direction if you have any inkling of gray area or doubt or think a patient should go but they don't want to, regardless if they're a child or an adult. Lean on medical control. I've had docs speak directly to the patient over my cell phone before and convince the patient to go. So sometimes hearing it from a doc and not us sometimes just has that little extra oomph of conviction. So,
They also have a legal team.
well, that too. That too. They carry a lot of malpractice insurance. Yeah, so as this is up here, possible exemptions, check local laws. So I think Derek said it the first night, it's Title 12 of Vermont state law that deals with emergency medical services. All this stuff is, like, you can read through all the fun legal mumbo jumbo. Sorry, that's just what I call laws. It's written in legal mumbo jumbo, and it's can be very boring to read. But if you're into that stuff, you can go read those bullets. I actually read through a bunch of the bullets while after reading this because I went through looking for like our duty to act stuff and whatnot. So I wanted to share that with you guys.
Chapter 17. Just in case
Yes.
you want to know.
Subsection 519.
Possibly, I don't know. 17.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just saying.
Oh.
I'm sorry, but loco means crazy in Spanish.
And loco parentis, I believe this means with,
It's Greek.
It's Latin.
yeah.
it's without parent or something,
In place of.
or in place of. I actually pulled the text up so I could reference it if I had to tonight.
In place of a parent.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Okay, so there we go. We talked about those. So involuntary transportation. So let's talk about this. We get the involuntary patient or involuntary transport. So you get called to a scene with the police and they want you to take a patient in for behavioral psychiatric reasons. Patient doesn't want to go. How are you handling this?
They go with you or they go with the police?
That's an option you can definitely give them. We give that option every day. Stretcher or cuffs.
Your choice.
That's their choice. That's one way.
Well, wouldn't it depend if they're, like, if they're under a certain
Like NCSS.
mental state, like who their guardian would be?
Correct.
Court
Yep.
ordered guardian or something?
Yep. So big thing is if you're ever with that, just make sure, just confirm with the police that they have custody of the person. So be sure either that they already have a warrant for protective custody, that this patient doesn't get the choice, that they're going either with us or with police. And this subject will come up multiple times in your careers where you will have patients that are, this also comes down to with intoxicated patients too. So they might not be under police protective custody. Want to keep saying police custody, but there's a difference between police custody and protective custody. So police custody means they're arrested. Protective custody means that they can't mentally make their own decisions and they are in the care of the state until they're mentally capable of making their own decisions again. So it's typically 72 hours, I believe, that's given. They're just not necessarily held for 72 hours.
If it's intoxication, they just, until they blow zero.
Typically below the legal limit.
No, it's zero.
Is it zero?
If they're in police custody, up at the jail, or in a holding cell, it's zero. That's it.
I always thought it was below the legal limit. Because at that point, you're legally allowed to make decisions and drive, and so. Okay.
Policy up there, and I worked there for a year, so you blow zeros until you're in that holding cell until you blow zero. You don't want to blow, you stay. That's their choice.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was below the legal limit.
Not once they're incarcerated.
Once they're incarcerated, okay.
Once they're incarcerated, they'd be placed either in like a correctional facility or a holding cell, it's zero.
Okay. Not all intoxicated
Hospitals, I don't know
patients.
about hospitals.
Right, but not all intoxicated patients go to jail or whatnot. Sometimes they go to the Howard Center up here, which is just a place for them to sleep it off. So, as far as I know, there it's just till they're below the legal
And
limit.
that's up to them, but when it's LE involved, it's zero. Until it's zero, you're not playing.
Okay. Hey, it's why we have these classes to have discussion. So, usually requires a decision by a mental health professional or a police officer. So if you're there first, you're having trouble convincing a patient, you know this patient's intoxicated, whether it's drugs, alcohol, psychiatric behavior, whether it's a psychotic break or whatnot, they can't make those decisions for themselves. You need to call a mental health professional in. And in our case, it's going to be, we're going to call the police in first, and they'll either call NCSS, NCSS for our area. If you work in a different area, like Chittenden County or down in Montpelier area, then it might be a different service. I'm not sure what all those, like I know Lamoille County would be Lamoille Mental Health. So they would bring in one of those mental health professional, and then they'll make the decision on whether protective custody is needed, or they may even just take possession of the patient, and they may take them to the hospital, or they may be able to work out a non-transporting thing where they'll work with them through outpatient. Sometimes that does happen, sometimes it doesn't. So the biggest thing with involuntary transport, there's been numerous cases over the past decade and longer restrained patients, okay? How do we ensure their health and well-being during a transport? Okay, we've put them in, they decided they're going with us, they're being a little bit violent, we've put them in restraints. They are restrained.
Who's putting in the restraints?
We have. You have made the decision to put them in restraints, which is within our grasp. If a patient is being violent and threatens themselves or your well-being, you have the right to put them in soft restraints. We're not putting them in handcuffs. Every ambulance should be carrying soft restraints. What's the best way to transport those patients?
The stretcher.
Right, the stretcher,
Yeah.
but positioning. How would you want them positioned on the stretcher?
On their back.
On their back. Do not ever put somebody face down on the stretcher and restrain them.
That's the prone position.
That's the prone position.
I don't know why you would.
Okay? You would be surprised at how many times this has happened, how many patients have died because of this, and how many lawsuits have been brought against EMS for this. I can't stress it enough. If you ever restrain a patient, you make sure they're on their back or their side. The side is okay too, just don't ever put them in the prone position and restrain them. There is so many respiratory things that can go wrong with a patient at that point, especially in an excited delirium type state, and you've got no way to control said airway. So, I just want to stress that point. Yeah.
Can they be in the supine position? You know what?
Supine, yeah, supine's on their back. Sorry, so supine is on their back. Lateral would be like side, left or right, and then prone is laying on your stomach. So we'll go and we'll talk about that stuff later. Any questions on involuntary transport on anything?
Police are gonna help you.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. PD's there. They all.
Send an officer with you.
Yeah, typically an officer. If you're getting to the point where you're restraining a patient, police are going to be there. Okay. PD's going to be there. You're also probably going to be calling for a higher level of care. You're probably going to want a paramedic coming because if some patients, if they're gorked out of their mind on PCP or cocaine or any number of uppers, they might need chemical restraint along with physical restraint. So at that point, if you're getting to the point of putting someone in physical restraint and they're still fighting, you're going to want a paramedic to come along. So, because they're gonna have the meds necessary to sedate this patient. I shouldn't say sedate. They call it chemically restraint. They say there's a difference between chemically restraint and sedating somebody. To me, it's kind of one and the same. We're just giving them enough medication to calm down, stop them from fighting. We're not knocking them out. It's not the point of it. The point is just to give them medication that calms the body. So, all right. Any other questions on this? Cool. This is a great discussion tonight, by the way, guys. I thought I had. Okay, nope. All right. So let's talk about refusals. Patients may refuse care or transport under the following 4 circumstances: legal age, awake and oriented, fully informed. That's a big one. And they have to sign a release form. The release form is just a standard liability clause releasing the crew and ambulance service from liability for their choice. Doesn't actually mean though that you can't be sued for that. Yeah. And we're going to cover that as we talk about, so legal age, legally able to consent. We talked about that, age of 18 or emancipated minor, serving in the armed forces. Awake and oriented. What does that mean?
You have to be conscious and know what they're doing.
Conscious know what they're doing. So typically we will abbreviate this. We'll call, when you learn about documentation, we get further into designating a certain responsiveness to a patient. They're going to be alert, oriented to person, place, time, and event. So we call it conscious, alert, oriented times 4. You might hear that sometimes on the radio when we're calling in reports or whatnot. So we might say times 1, times 2, times 3, or times 4. Some places like hospitals, a lot of times they only do 3. 3 is the max. They'll do person, place, and event. Or person, place, and time. So a lot of times hospitals will only use a designation of 3 as a max. EMS, we tend to use 4. 3 and 4 would be I would say 3 and 4 are your awake and oriented. If someone's CAO3, that would be, they should be legally able to consent at that point or refuse. Anything less than 3, I would be talking to family or a doctor. Some patients, dementia patients, they might be at baseline, they might only be at ×2, just because of what's going on. In this case, this is where family comes into play. Fully informed. So we as EMS providers have to inform the patient why it is a bad idea to refuse transport and why they can refuse transport. Why there's not really a good reason to refuse transport for there, but so we need to make sure they understand, number one, the risks of, the biggest one is the risks of refusal. Someone passed out is now awake. We need to make sure they understand that symptoms have resolved, but symptoms may come back. You may have low blood pressure, you may have a heart arrhythmia, you may have a low pulse, all sorts of things may happen, up into including serious injury, harm, and death. So these are all things that you have to explain to the patient, that they understand this, that they're fully informed that refusing to go to the hospital, refusing care can result in serious harm or their death. Because we don't always necessarily know what's going on. We can treat symptoms, we can initially start the assessments, we can find out what's going on initially, but it's going to be the hospitals that make the full final diagnosis of what's going on. So we need to make sure that they're very clear on this before you get a signature. And then they'll sign the release form at that point, once they understand that. When you yeah, go ahead.
What if they refuse to sign the release?
The patient refuses to sign, take your time.
Yeah. So so they have that right. At that point, if there's a family member on scene, I would get them to sign as a witness, saying that you explained it, and then in your narrative portion, and Garrett's going to go over all this next week with documentation. He's going to talk about how to write your narratives, different wording, where different things go. You're going to document everything you explained to the patient. You're going to document that the patient did not want to go to the hospital and is refusing to sign the no transport form. You're also going to put in that, patient's husband was on scene, heard all this, signed as a witness. That patient said she would not sign this no transport form. Cleared with medical direction. I would even, because we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth on different style, like a little bit how to convince a patient. This is where medical control can come in handy. Call the docs. Say, I think this person should go. This is what's going on. This is what we found. They may say, let me talk to the patient. They're going to hand it off. You can hand your phone off to them. You can also use a landline. Use a patient's landline. I've used landlines where I don't have cell service. Have the doc talk to them. And then if they still refuse, make sure you document that the doc talked to the patient and who the doctor was. And then, yeah, you literally got to document everything in your narrative in this case. Because so believe it or not, refusals are going to be one of the higher things that get you into a lawsuit. Because what happens is patients don't want to go to the hospital. You do everything in your power to convince them to go. They don't. They sign off. 3 hours later, their condition is deteriorated, and now they're dead. And now the family's saying you didn't do everything you needed to do, and now you're sitting on a court stand defending yourself. So this is why documentation is super important. So believe it or not, these are what get people in trouble the most, are refusals and not documenting enough and not trying hard enough.
What if you had somebody that's nonverbal with hearing impairment and there's nobody else with them?
Oh Jesus, you just gotta throw in just a real ball. I know, yeah. That's a difficult one. I'm not even sure I could give you, there are, pad and paper. Pad and paper is a good way. If they're old enough to understand writing, obviously if they're 4 years old, they might not understand, but if they're teenage years or adult and whatnot, pad of paper, writing back and forth is a great way. They do have apps and stuff now. Hospitals have them, EMS agencies typically don't have them, but they do have like apps where they can get people that speak every language in the world. And they also have signers on there that can speak to the hearing impaired and those that know how to sign language. So practical for EMS to have. It's not as, because they're expensive apps. They're not typically like a free app you can get. They're typically a bought app, and they can be very expensive with the subscriptions. So not something we typically have, but yeah, pad and paper is probably going to be your best bet on our end of technology. I wish we had those apps available to us. It would be super nice. It'd be super nice if the hospital would kind of like key us into that same thing with them, so that way we could all share it. So. But as you see the final thing, despite all the precautions you take, you can still be liable. It's kind of dumb. Like you explain everything, they sign a thing saying, hey, I understand and I'm releasing you from liability, but 3 hours later when their conditions deteriorated and the family goes, I don't think you did everything, so I'm suing you and your company. Now you're dealing with it. So that's why documentation is super important with this kind of stuff, is because this might not happen 6 months after the call. With the way lawsuits work, it's going to be 4 years in the future. You're going to remember that call from 3 o'clock in the morning 4.5 years ago? No. That's why documentation is super important, so you can read that thing and go, oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah, that's why we document. And that's why Garrett writes about 6 pages in his novel. So we're gonna take the time. So some of these refusals can be very complicated. You may be on scene for 20 minutes, 30 minutes trying to convince this patient to go. You're gonna exhaust, especially if you think they should go. We all have the little old lady that fell down, go boom, just needs a little hand up. Those typically don't need a lot of convincing, especially if she gets up, she's acting normal, she's walking back and forth. Those might not require you to be and convince them to go to the hospital. Okay, that might be like, are you hurt? We're assessing you, everything looks good, you're walking fine, don't need to go. Those typically don't require a lot of scene time. But the patients that are, actually I think, was it your call in Georgia? I'll bring this up. Won't mention any names or anything. Guy had a heart attack in Georgia. Refused. Having a documented MI diagnosed by a paramedic. Would not go to the hospital. Wanted to die. What are you going to do?
Wait till he's unresponsive.
That's one option. Wait till he's unresponsive.
No DNR, no.
Nope.
You said say goodbye.
There's nothing you can do about it. He does not want to. I mean, how long were you on scene trying to convince this guy?
I was on scene within an hour and literally telling him, you're going to die. Like, there's no way around this. You're having an active MI, a bad MI at that. He had the capacity, he had the mental cognition to make his own decisions.
Did he die?
And that's, well, he lasted a week.
Wow. I was actually surprised he lasted that long when I heard.
Wow. You stayed at home?
Yep.
That's
One I documented my butt off.
Yeah.
That one was a novel.
So, you're going to spend time with these patients, especially these ones that you think they need to go and you believe they need to go. Yeah.
I have a quick question. You have a call for someone who's overdosed, and you go over there, you'll play Narcan, regains consciousness, whatever. If there's no PD around and you ask them, hey, what did you take, and they tell you, are you required by law to tell the police if they show up?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
It's privileged information.
Okay.
Still got to document it.
You document it in your run report, but if the cops ask, you don't have any right to tell
You
them.
have to subpoena the report.
Yes, they will have to subpoena the report. And that's what you tell them. You just politely tell them. We have a very good working relationship here with the Sheriff's Department and the St. Albans Police Department.
And they know.
And they know. They know that, like, we're not going to blatantly, violate patient confidentiality.
Gotcha.
So sometimes it's just like, hey, if you want to know what they said, you're going to have to subpoena the report.
Most people who are overdosing now anyways aren't getting in trouble for it. They're
Yeah.
able to, so.
I don't.
Behind the wheel or in an accident or something.
Yeah.
Then
As I say, I don't think the PD here ever charges anybody really with that stuff anymore. They just more or less,
It's not prosecutable.
yeah. So they really come mainly for scene safety for us, because overdose scenes can sometimes be very dangerous depending on what's going on. And they come to basically, if there's a fight that breaks out with the patient after they wake up, because patients that come back from an overdose can sometimes be violent, so they're there to help with restraint and whatnot, but they're not there to really, they might, when they come back around, they might question like, hey, who'd you get your stuff from? Trying to work their way up the ladder, but other than that, they're really not gonna do anything.
But they're involved in an accident that causes,
Right. Property damage, loss of life.
That's probable cause, that's not even a concern, that's on them.
Right.
Right, nothing with us.
Yeah, nothing with us. But yeah, so you're gonna.
The car's wrapped around a telephone pole, and he's like groggy, well, picks him up, and then we're gonna charge him with DUI.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, and that comes completely later, after we've dealt with the patient and everything, way later on.
So this question's actually for Garrett. So for that case, at what point do you leave the scene?
So, in that situation, you have to contact med control, because I'm coming up with a diagnosis that could detriment the patient. The patient's refusing, he's got two major things, mental capacity, so capacity to make his own decisions, and basically the comprehension to understand what's going on. And so he was completely aware of the situation, he knew the risks. I contacted medical control, who was the on-call doc, explained everything to him. The on-call doc, basically explained the same thing to the patient, that this could kill you. And
What was it?
he was a STEMI,
What's that?
So he's having a heart attack, an active heart attack.
active heart attack.
I don't know these procedures.
Yeah.
Again, we're using some medical terminology. You guys, we'll get into all that stuff later, and
We're gonna throw this medical terminology at you, because as we repeat it more, you guys will understand it more. You
Yeah.
have to know it for the NREMT exam.
So at that point, he's still having a heart attack and you pack up your kit?
Yep.
That's
So-
all we can do.
As to your question as to time limit, when do you know? When you can't come up with any more ideas. When you have literally exhausted all options, that's when you know. And your last step, probably, I would say your last step would be medical control. Once medical control is involved and they say, he has that right, I've spoken to him, I agree, he has that right, as much as I disagree with him, sign him off.
You gonna leave him alone?
If that's the case,
We're not
yeah.
gonna pester him or anything.
Yeah.
Family? I mean, that's what, I mean.
Yeah,
Always
no,
make
I
an effort
mean,
to
if
call.
he's alone, he's alone, he has that right, so. It would be better if family's there.
Just one person to watch him and
So.
keep after him.
But, and that brings us to like, trying to persuade them. Hey, is there anyone we can call and let them know what's going on, to keep an eye on you and check in on you and stuff like that? Is it okay if we talk to them about what's going on? Make sure you get permission to tell the family, because you're talking about protected information at this point. So make sure you ask, like, is it okay for me to talk to your sister about, what's going on, and see if she can check up on you? Yes, it's perfectly okay. Call her. Here's her number. Perfect. At that point, that's verbal consent to give his information out to her. So talking to family, calling them, basically doing whatever you can possibly think of to spend time trying to figure out. Listen to the patient. Why do they not want to go to the hospital? What do you think would be a common?
Insurance.
Yeah, insurance sometimes is one, especially for like younger people.
Embarrassment.
Embarrassment, yeah, definitely.
There is
Older generation, typically, what do you think an older generation person?
They're just done.
Doctors.
Doctors. Or my sister died at the hospital. I don't want to go to the hospital. I've heard that one before.
There's a paranoia about going to a hospital because they think they find anything.
Like
to do
seriousness.
Yeah. Yep. They think they're going to end up in a nursing home. I've heard that one. No, if I go to the hospital, they're going to stick me in one of those nursing homes, and I'm never going to come home. Listen to them, because then you can work with that. You can work. Well, that's not the case. No. Once they get the issue fixed, you're gonna come home at that point. You don't go to rehab for something like this typically. Or if you do go to rehab, it's only going to be for a couple of weeks to get your strength back, because you're going to be in the hospital. So you can work with those. You can persuade them and work with those.
Persuasion, is it okay to tell a white lie?
No. I would stay away from any lying, even if it's a tiny little lie. I would stay away from. Never lie to your patients, because if you get caught, their trust is gonna you're gonna drop off a cliff with their trust, and you're gonna be back at square one.
What
So
if
don't.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What if there's somebody else there and like another family member, and they said take them, and then the patient's like, no.
Again, if the patient's within their own right state of mind, then what the patient says goes.
Okay.
So, and does that come
Also,
up
if you
here?
like just body snatch a patient based on
It's-
somebody else's authority, that
Oh,
is
yeah.
assault and
Yeah.
you're not protected ever.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You take a patient against their will, and you'll either get an assault. Well, Vermont doesn't have a battery charge. It's all kind of combined with an assault charge. Last time I looked, I don't think there's assault and battery. I think it's just assault.
Probably gonna be like.
Or assault 1 and assault 2
Could be
kind of thing.
kidnapping.
But anyway,
Verbal assault.
you're gonna get that, or you might even get a kidnapping charge too.
Unlawful restraint.
Unlawful restraint. You get all sorts of things. So don't ever, if a patient is able to make their own decisions and they understand what those decisions that they're making, do not ever take a patient, because that'll just end you up in a lot of legal trouble.
You can get a kidnapping charge?
Absolutely.
yeah.
Sure.
You don't have to snatch a kid to get a kidnapping charge.
Yeah.
I mean, he says no, you throw him in the van and drive off, that's kidnapping.
Wow.
So,
Back to consent.
yeah.
That's unreal.
That's my joke with patients when we go up to like do a transfer off the floor to like UVM or something. I'll go in and be like, I need you to sign here. This just gives us permission to transport and treat you. It says we're not kidnapping you. Blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of an icebreaker.
Yeah.
So just kind of an icebreaker with people and stuff. Kind of gets them laughing and stuff and eases the tension. So you find those little jokes and stuff you do to help break the ice. So we talked about all that. Consult medical direction. We said that's kind of probably your final, maybe your last thing that you want to do, just because once a doctor kind of gives you an order, that's the final. So doctor's orders are kind of the final thing. We talked about calling family. Again, make sure you get the patient's permission to pass on that protected medical information to them. You can bring law enforcement in if you have to. Sometimes, depending on the condition and what's wrong with the patient, sometimes a badge has a better chance of persuading somebody than we do. Sometimes that badge makes all the difference. They see the cops and they're like, okay, all right, I'll go. Typically, we're not using this for the little old lady that doesn't want to go to the hospital. We're usually typically using this for more of intoxicated patients that might be kind of being jackasses, for lack of a better term. That just don't want to go because they just don't want to go. So you can bring law enforcement in this case. Again, use the refusal of care form used by your agency when they do sign off. Does anyone here use paper copies, or is everyone that's either on a service, you guys just using the siren report?
No, we use paper now, fire station still.
The fire station?
I know he's paper.
Fire departments, we use paper the next day. Of course they will. They're not ever gonna come out of that.
Yeah. We typically, I know here, usually we use our tough books.
Yeah, there's no RCO form now.
Yeah. So usually we'll use the form on the siren, but like honestly, if I'm feeling, let's face it, if I'm feeling lazy and I don't feel like booting up the computer in the middle of the night, sometimes I just grab the paper form. Like we have the papers as like a backup.
Yep.
So, and plus sometimes you have computer failures. Sometimes the internet doesn't like to boot up, and like the run report system doesn't want to boot up in the middle of the night. So we do have the backup forms to sign off. So just become familiar with that.
The other thing I'll mention, so involving law enforcement, protective custody cases. So in our new protocols, we intervened a protective custody case. So a patient who has the mental capacity but is a threat to themselves or others. So a good example of that would be somebody who harmed themselves, or they want to commit suicide or something like that. We can't just ditch them and say, well, you're medically cleared, you don't have any life-threatening injuries, but you keep saying you want to harm yourself. We're not just going to leave and say, it's your choice to leave. We can't do that, especially when they're threatening their own lives. So Vermont put in a new protocol. It's a protective custody protocol. It's cumbersome. It involves an officer to involve I think it's the lieutenant, right?
Yeah.
Or the supervisor in charge. So they have to get the supervisor in charge to the scene, and then they have to get a warrant from a superior judge to issue that patient into protective custody. Then from there, that patient becomes a ward of the state, and now legally we have the right to take that patient against their will to the hospital. It's not fun. You have to wake up a judge at 3 o'clock in the morning to sign this warrant, and you can't just leave the patient. So just something to keep in mind when we're using law enforcement. Usually suicidal patients, they're willing to go with us. They call 911. They're like, hey, I'm not feeling well. I want to hurt myself. I want to protect myself. Let's go to the hospital. We do have those cases where the patient's like, I want to harm myself and I want you to get the hell out of here. That's where we have to step into law enforcement and be like, we can't leave this person alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. When somebody brings up the idea that they want to hurt themselves or others,
Or others. Yeah.
they have lost the right to make the decisions for themselves. At that point, you have to involve law enforcement and mental health.
I will also note the state has funded at least a regional position, up to 8 positions, to accompany law enforcement for anything that needs protective custody order.
Yep.
So not only do you need to find the designee, which is either going to be lieutenant, captain on that department, they have to notify the mental health counselor or practitioner that works with their agency.
Yep.
And everybody comes.
That started in the city.
Yes.
Yeah,
Everybody has to come to scene, and then it has to be the opinion of the mental health clinician.
Yep.
It can't just be on the paramedics that are there, the EMTs that are there, or law enforcement. It has to be a collective, and that's when they can request the warrant. So
Yep.
there's now another step to that, but it
Yeah.
was supposed to be to separate law enforcement from one step to allow EMT practitioners to have the.
And is that, so, because I know St. Albans City has,
Yeah, they got that.
they have their NCSS worker that's riding with them, but she's only there during the day, she's not at night. So is that something that has to be specifically her, or can it be like crisis and whatnot getting involved?
The positions that were funded were for crisis intervention. So
Okay.
if a city previously had one, which some did across the state, that's up to the contract that they wrote with that individual or that agency. But the positions that the state funded and they required them to be part of this protocol, that's a as we call you situation.
When was this law, this is a,
That was in 2019 when it went through the House.
And that became official.
I was under the understanding you had a 24-hour.
Yeah, it became official in 2020 because the Senate took their sweet time.
Gee, no, politicians taking their sweet time? No.
Only the Senate takes their sweet time.
Yeah.
I thought it was still a 24-hour, you had that.
Sorry.
You get away with this, I can't.
You're fine.
Are you good?
Yeah.
If you guys do have questions, actually, I wanted to bring this up. I'm gonna go right back to the beginning with the scope of practice. If you guys haven't already, or don't have a book, if you have your phones or your computers for class, it'd be a great idea to download, either get the state protocol app on your phone,
Yep.
or download the PDF file from Vermont EMS website to your computers.
What's the app called?
Yeah, what is that?
Oh, the app is called, I believe, just Vermont EMS Protocol.
Creative.
I know, isn't it? Oh, you texted me. Can you let me in? Hey, here's your text
A
here.
little late on that.
Why don't you just knock? Yeah, I think it's just Vermont EMS.
Yeah.
I will say the app update that they did in 2020 sucks.
Yeah, the app runs really slow.
Yeah. You have to
On some
refresh a
phones.
bunch of times.
I've had to delete it and reinstall it and stuff a couple of times to get it working properly. They need to fix it. They need to go
Fix the bugs.
working through the bugs on it.
But the bonus about it is it updates, it refreshes itself every time. It's got a med calculator,
Yeah.
everything.
Just a good idea to have, because once we get into talking about like treatments and things like that, we'll be referring to the protocols a lot. And the police custody protocol that you talked about is in there, so you guys can read through it yourself and start becoming familiar with it. I believe it's in the appendix, in the medical policies.
Yeah, it's 8.14.
So yeah, going back to that. So there you go. All right. Any more questions on what we got there? I think we talked about this. Oh yeah. So I had one other question in regards to this, and we've been talking a lot about intoxication, right? What constitutes intoxication? In our, I'm not talking police world and .08 and stuff. with what we deal with on the medical side of things, what constitutes intoxication.
Being able to use your own faculties and your own judgment.
Okay, that's a good a definition as any. So let me ask you this: go to a car accident, family of 3 involved, husband, wife, and say a 10-year-old daughter, and dad was driving, had 3 beers with dinner. Is he intoxicated?
All depends on his body weight and his tolerance and all that.
Okay, but you're gonna be able to judge
I
that?
gotta look at that.
Exactly. Okay.
Some jurisdictions say you don't have to be intoxicated, you can be impaired.
Yep.
Different too.
How are we judging that though?
You're not.
Okay, we're not judging that.
And why?
What are we
That's what I care.
what are we gonna base on? I'm not saying that you should transport. I'm not saying you shouldn't transport them. I'm just bringing this up because this turns into a very gray area. Can they make their own decisions?
Well, if they're alert times 3 or 4,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a reasonable decision.
Makes reasonable decisions. Yep.
But if you got somebody who's flaring drunk that obviously was driving, then you put it to the wife or the mother because their child's hurt, or they're both whacked,
Yep.
or, you know,
Well-
then it's impaired. It's assumed.
Here's a question I don't know the exact answer to. If EMS is called to scene, priority is treating the medical. With any car accidents that's usually suspected, they're toning out VSP as well.
Correct. Yeah.
So
If you're at an accident like
your
this,
priority wouldn't be one way or the other
Proper, huh?
determining intoxication. It would be treating the patient and letting VSP take it from there. If they have
right.
injuries,
But if they don't want to go to the hospital,
then you can hand them over to VSP.
yeah, you could. But
oftentimes.
just because you hand them over to VSP, you still need to get a refusal.
Not to mention, they
Just
have
because they were- just because-
major injuries and they don't want to go.
Right.
You
And
can,
they're
Just because you're signing them over to VSP does not take our responsibility away. You still have to get a sign off, and you still have to follow all of these things.
Whether they personally sign it or not, or you say refuse to sign, date and time, blah, blah, blah.
Yep, you can do that.
so if it's alert times 3, you have them sign, you have somebody witness, and then you hand them off. It's not abandonment because you have gone through all your
Yeah.
protocols.
I bring this subject up. Go ahead. You have a question.
Can we argue that if they decided to drive after 3 drinks, they're not capable of making the right decision?
Ooh,
That's
that's a tough argument to make.
That might have been an hour ago when they made that decision.
Right, with dinner.
And
Food
they-
always
and they
affects the
sobered
uptake
up
of alcohol. I bring this up not to argue with anybody or argue amongst ourselves. I bring this up because this is like real world. This is a question that got brought up, I think, in my EMT class back in the day. Like it's a legit question. You're going to have patients that get into a fender bender. Yeah, I had a couple of drinks with dinner, or I just came from the bar with buddies after work and had a couple of drinks. I'm on my way home now. These are questions that you're going to have to figure out in the field. I can't give you a straight answer.
Of course,
Because
if they think they're intoxicated and the blue lights show up, they probably want to go with you to.
It's called incarceritis, and it doesn't get them out of anything.
No, it delays it.
Exactly.
I can't give you a straight answer on an answer to this question. I can give you what I've done in the past. I can give you my experiences, but when it comes down to it, it is a circumstance by circumstance basis. You have to assess the patient, and you have to take everything into account, and then you need to make the best decision that you can in these cases. So that's why I bring this question up. It's just not really to start arguments or anything, but just to get you guys thinking about, when I say there's a lot of gray area in this, and not every call is the same, and every call is going to have moral, ethical, and legal implications, these are the types of calls I'm talking about. And so, lastly, here with refusing care, just inform the patient at the end, like if they change their mind, they're more than welcome to call you back. You know our number. It's 911. Just give us a call back. If you change your mind, we'll happily come back and we'll happily take you to the hospital at that point. Don't be afraid to give us a call back. That's the way you can leave it with a patient. Just let them know. They can call you back. We're happy to go back.
I get the frequent flyers.
Yeah,
I call all the time.
everybody will have those.
Oh, yeah.
You just be nice to them.
That's it.
And like we said, you know, if a friend or relative can remain with the patient, great. And then document all attempts to convince the patient accordingly. Just document the hell out of it. All right, DNRs. So it's obviously, this is a legal document, expresses the wishes of the patient when they're unable to speak for themselves. Okay. So the overarching national thing is a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. Vermont, we have, so this is the PULST form nationally. Vermont, we have the DNR/COLST form, which is just clinician, which is just substitutes physician for clinician, because I think in Vermont, nurse practitioners and PAs can sign them. So it's a clinician orders for life-sustaining treatment. I actually added a little bit in here. So Vermont uses the DNR/COLST forms, the thing there. Become familiar with these. Should also become familiar with what living wills are and healthcare proxies. So this is where, I think someone asked the question earlier, this is where we're going to deal with powers of attorney. Okay. This is where we're going to have a little lady, she's alert and oriented ×2. That's her baseline due to dementia. Sometimes she's only ×1. Depends on the time of day, depends on the day. How do you convince someone like that to go to the hospital? Well, a lot of these patients, they can't make that decision on their own because of their baseline mental status, because of the dementia or Alzheimer's. So they have, they call powers of attorney. So they have a family member that is their legal, that makes medical decisions for them legally. So in this case, if that little old lady doesn't want to go to the hospital, but the power of attorney's there and says, no, I need her to go to the hospital, she's definitely not acting correctly, she's definitely sick, the power of attorney is, they are the word of God at that point for that patient. You listen to them in regards to that stuff. Damn it, I thought I put the
The only thing about these, you have to see it, right?
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
So,
Or have a doctor on the other end of the phone saying, yes, I have it.
because they will be at the hospital usually.
So with the, you have
put
to
the
see it.
DNR orders in here.
What's that?
I screenshotted them and put them in here. I thought they were right here. They should have been right after this. Well, that sucks. I'm sorry, go ahead.
With the DNR, any advance directive, any end of life, whatnot, they can disclose that they have it, and even if you don't see it, you have an obligation to look for it. So, because wouldn't that be within, hey, I'm not wearing my medical alert bracelet, but I'm a Christian Scientist, you can't treat me. Even if it's not on them, you have an obligation to follow.
So,
Their
If
care.
they're
It's not
able to make their own
life-threatening.
decision, yes. But if we go to a patient who's unresponsive, we can't find a DNR form anywhere,
Yeah.
you work.
then I can't go by it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if like somebody rasps out to you, hey, I have a DNR, don't touch me.
Mhm.
You have an obligation to look for that, even though they've now gone unconscious, and that is a life-threatening condition.
How much time would you spend looking for it though if you're?
I'm only gonna look in specific places, and that's spaces that we tell that patients are told to put these forms, which is typically on the refrigerator, on some sort of corkboard if they have places where they hang things, or inside the refrigerator. A lot of times, the file of life, you might have heard them, or vial of life. Sometimes we tell patients to put them in the door of their refrigerator. So I'm only going to look in specific places, and if I
And
don't find
sometimes
it,
they'll keep these records with the hospital,
Yeah.
so we'll call the hospital and say, hey, do you have any records of DNR? with
Yeah,
them?
so what I'm asking is, you still have an obligation for at least a second or two to try and verify that before you can.
it's going to be a very cursory. We're not going to go digging through desk drawers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but it's going to be a very cursory, quick glance around the house. Try to find it in the common places. If we don't find it, like Gary said, we're going to start CPR. We're going to start care for the patient while somebody gets on the phone with the hospital we're not going to take it any farther than CPR and breathing for the patient. While somebody gets on the phone with the hospital and says, this is the patient, date of birth, do you have a DNR on record? They will look the patient up, and if they have a DNR on records, they can verify it with you, and you can take the order to terminate resuscitation. So yes, a cursory glance, but you're definitely not tearing apart someone's home looking for this file.
Yeah, you're not leaving the patient
So.
just like.
Joe, you want me to pass this?
Right, because I mean, ultimately, we
Yeah,
want to follow
sure.
the patient's wishes. I don't want to do CPR on everybody who doesn't want it.
Right.
But
Yeah,
if we
but-
can't, because we got to back ourselves up. Because a lot of times, we're trying to follow the patient's wishes, we can't prove it, we don't perform resuscitative efforts. And then a year down the road, a patient's family member sues us
Yeah.
and says, well, you didn't talk to the POA, or, you didn't follow your orders. So it's just
Hey, there it is.
covering us too.
For some reason, I put it way down in the thing.
On the flip side of that, if they disclosed they had a DNR
Mhm.
and you did life-saving, they came back with that super slim chance, and then they sued you for not following orders. I mean,
Mhm.
there's kind of two sides to that coin.
Right.
Of caution.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of a tricky situation. So that's why we kind of tell everybody who gets a DNR form, patients we go to, we ask, what are your wishes? You're awake and talking to me now? What are your wishes? Because if you go south, I want to do what you want us to do.
So I found it. Apparently, I put it further down in the presentation and not where it was belonged. So the difference between like a living will and advance directive, a lot of times like living wills, advance directives, sometimes they're written like in a patient's will, or they're written in a different legal document that a hospital doesn't have, or you don't have unless a family member is there and knows it exists. If that's the case, if someone pulls out one of those like advanced, see, no, it's right here, it's signed by the lawyer, it says don't do anything to this patient. Honor it, but call the doctors first. Don't stop treatment, call the docs, say, hey, this patient's here, I've got an advance directive, it's not a DNR COLST form, but it's an advance directive signed by the patient that says no life assistant, no CPR, no intubation, none of that stuff. Can we honor it? I don't know of a doc that's going to tell you no.
Right.
They're probably going to tell you, yes, honor it, you can terminate resuscitation. So just FYI, there are other versions of this stuff out there. However, every doctor's office out there uses this now. Those things are pretty rare to run across. I think I've run across, 2 in like 10 years.
My mom had all three.
Your mom had all 3?
Yeah.
So that's
The only time
covering all bases
realistically
right
is if
there.
they're from out of state.
What was the question?
No, like realistically, the only time
gotcha.
we come across it is if they're out of state.
Yep.
They're visiting Vermont, they go into cardiac arrest, we don't have their Vermont form on file.
And you're not gonna call, well, you have to
Right.
find out their local hospital, see if they have it.
Right.
So,
So, Liam just went and printed that, though. I found this. So let's just go through this. So a COLST form actually takes care of other things besides just do not resuscitate and do not intubate orders. That's the main purpose of it, but when you get to page 2, it talks about, do you want intubation? Some patients may want a trial period of intubation if it's one of those things where, yes, intubate me, and if I get better, fantastic. If I don't, we're done, kind of thing. Then you get transferred to hospitals. This is big with like nursing homes. A lot of patients in nursing homes, they don't want to be transferred to the hospital when they're on comfort care or on hospice. So they'll have this little box. Do not transfer me unless comfort cares cannot be met. That's the key words, cannot be met at the current location. Or they say, yes, transfer me. Antibiotic use in here. Some patients don't want antibiotics. Some want a limited run of antibiotics. And then some say, yeah, run the gamut on me. Then it talks about nutrition, feeding tubes, that kind of stuff, the placing of like G-tubes for nutrition and hydration. So it talks about all this stuff. So these are very big. So when you ever go to a nursing home and they hand you this, make sure you look through this because, I hate to say it, but nursing homes sometimes have a habit of not paying attention to this page. Sometimes they only pay attention to the front page and they don't necessarily look through this stuff sometimes. And then have a polite conversation with the nursing home. And then medical interventions, do they want comfort, limited, or full treatment? And then make sure, the biggest thing is make sure it's not only signed by the patient, but make sure it's also signed by the clinician. What do you do if you get one of these that isn't signed by the clinician? It's newly filled out, family just filled it out, family and patient filled it out, they haven't taken it back to the doctor to get it's not valid, right?
call medical control.
No, 100%. You could call medical control and fill them in. Again, start treatment, then call the doc and say, like, look, this guy, the family's telling me they have the DNR Coles form here. I'm looking at it. They have not had a chance to take it back to his primary care to get it finished and signed and official. Yeah, but he does not want CPR and stuff. Can we honor this thing? Med control can save your butt in a lot of things. Because obviously the patient doesn't want it. Sometimes time runs out on people. And they don't get the chance to get back to there. I've never run across one that hasn't been signed, but
Usually you have to have that done
Usually it's
with
done-
the doctor
yeah, usually it's done
and
at
the
the
power
doctor's
of attorney
office.
person there, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's all witnessed.
I'm just saying, these are available online, so there's nothing saying that someone at home can print this thing out and start filling it out and then take it to their primary care. So, just FYI. I mean, where'd you print that one? Do you think you can print them right off the Vermont Department of Health? Yeah.
They're in our protocol too.
Yeah, so people can print these at home and start filling them out. So just be advised, always make sure that there's 2 signatures. All right, I'm going to back up now to negligence. So, something that should have been done, that was not done, or was done incorrectly. So, there's 4 things to proving a negligence claim. So, you have to prove that the EMT had a duty to act, that they breached their duty, failed to provide a standard of care expected, or failed to act. Then they must prove that there's approximate causation, so the patient suffered harm due to this inaction or action that the EMT took. And then negligent EMTs may be required to pay damages, depends whether you personally get sued or your company gets sued, or both may get sued. Let's make sure I'm not missing anything on. Lawsuits against EMTs are usually classified as torts, which are civil suits. Basically, it's civil liability. It's not criminal, so you typically won't go to jail unless you purposefully killed somebody. But yeah, it's just a civil case. So in the case of negligence, I'm going to butcher this because it's Latin, but it's res ipsa loquitur. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but it means the thing that speaks for itself. It's a legal concept. It basically means that the act doesn't necessarily need to be negligent to be negligent. So in this case, we'll use the dropping of the stretcher. Nobody purposefully drops a stretcher. Sometimes it slips from our hands, and if the stretcher gets dropped by the EMTs or paramedics or whatever, and that thing crashes and that patient gets hurt from that, that's negligence on our part. That's the example that they use for this. So the act doesn't necessarily need to be negligent to prove negligent. Just the action of what happened is negligence. Any questions on that? Duty to act. Here's the other one you were asking about. So this is the obligation to provide care to a patient. Duty to act can be not super clear sometimes. Vermont actually has a pretty clear law in regards to this. It'll cover your off-duty time. It also covers like you're on duty but you're out of jurisdiction. A lot of times we take transfers out of state. Come across an accident in Massachusetts coming back from Boston. What do? Do you have a duty to act? You know, so it covers that kind of stuff. I would always say yes if you're in uniform and in a truck. Probably be a good idea to stop. Some duty to act laws are as simple as you have met the duty to act if you stop and call 911. You've met the duty to act. You have acted. You have helped get help started. So others can be a little bit more complicated. I believe there's only 8 states that actually have a duty to act law on the books, and Vermont was actually one of the first. I found that out. So, so when it comes down to it, follow your local laws and protocols and follow your own conscience. If you feel like you need to stop, stop. So Vermont's duty to act is Title 12, Chapter 23, subsection 519. It says a person who knows that another is exposed to grave physical harm shall, to the extent that the same can be rendered without danger or peril to himself or without interference with important duties owed to others, give reasonable assistance to the exposed person unless that assistance or care is being provided by others. Legal mumbo jumbo. Basically, this kind of covers the gamut of not just like EMS, but it also covers like other people in distress. If you have someone's getting hurt and you see someone being physically assaulted and you're a police officer, it kind of has that duty to act that they need to intervene to help out. That they have the abilities to intervene in that. Same with accidents. When we come across an accident, we should stop. Now, what if you got a couple drinks? Come across an accident. When I say drinks, I mean alcohol. Had a couple beers. But you're legal to drive. We're not going to get into that. We're just saying, you had a couple drinks, had dinner, driving home, come across an accident. Do you stop?
Probably.
You're required to render all actions appropriate. So if you're not in an appropriate position to care for a patient, you're in an appropriate position to call for help.
Yep.
So it's whatever care is appropriate. If you're not trained for something, don't do it.
Right.
Don't give a restaurant tracheotomy. Like, maybe call 911.
Right. And, you know, that's where the Good Samaritan Acts come into play also with that. But, yeah. All right, let's get through that. We already talked about that. So, abandonment. I don't know what, I guess this does come under duty to act. So once care, if you do stop, once you initiate care on a patient, once you start talking to them and assessing them, that patient is yours until equal or greater training comes to replace you. So it has to be another EMT or higher comes to replace you, take over the care of that patient. If you start treating this patient, start talking to them, start assessing them, helping them out, and think, oh, there's the ambulance, see you later, and you don't wait until someone comes to take over, that's abandonment. Leaving a patient before somebody of equal or greater training is able to take over care, that would be considered abandonment.
I got a question on that.
Sure.
So, say you're on a BLS unit, and you show up and there's an ALS provider that's been doing BLS care, they can't transfer it to somebody at their trained level.
It's a great question. It's actually a fantastic question. They can.
Because they've only provided BLS care.
Bingo.
Okay.
So when I say equal or greater training, it comes down to also the care that's being provided. If the care being provided is at the BLS level, then they can transfer care to an EMT. If by, this paramedic, say it's a medic, you show up on this scene on a BLS rig and this medic's just like, oh yeah, I had to do an emergency cricothyrotomy to make sure the patient started breathing. That's where we cut the throat open for those that don't know, and stick a breathing tube in. That medic is going with you. If they try to, like, oh no, you're fine, just breathe for the patient through this tube. If they try to do that, tell the cops to arrest them. Because that's a huge breach of scope of practice, breach of duty. That medic's in so much trouble for doing that. He'll probably lose his license too. But yes, that's a great question. So the care that's being provided is also important in this. And I was actually going to bring that up, but thank you for asking the question.
Does that also qualify if it's like an MCI?
Oh,
MCI you get into a little different route.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Because now you're going into, I need to triage to do kind of the greater good for the most.
Yep.
So it's really, okay, I'm not leaving you, but I need to figure out what I have and what resources we need.
Yep.
So you're not abandoning the scene, but you're trying to figure out what additional resources do I need to this scene.
Yep.
So MCI situations, you kind of go into a different spectrum
Yep.
of things. But if you have, one or two patients and you see them and you're like, well, you can wait for the ambulance to arrive, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
That'll be abandoning.
And MCIs come up in a couple of weeks to talk about all that. The differences in how MCIs work, because there's a lot different that works with an MCI in terms of this stuff.
Well,
So-
I mean, I could kind of see the scenario where, you show up at an MCI, you stabilize a patient by doing something more than a basic can do. Once the patient's stabilized, can you transfer that patient and say, hospital's 5 minutes down the road, I'm going to start on the next patient?
If I've done something above the scope of the person who arrived to transport the patient,
Yeah,
I can't dish that patient off to somebody
gotcha.
of
That was my question.
lesser level.
Yeah, okay.
It's mainly, with MCIs, it mainly comes into play with like the triage scenario.
Yeah.
Once a patient reaches the treatment center of an MCI, then scope of practice becomes bigger. But with triage, if I determine, like, say a patient, if I can intubate a patient to save their life really quickly, I can tube them, tell an EMT, breathe for this patient 12 times a minute, as you're trained.
Yeah.
I can move on to the next patient, triage them.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of those things that's kind of overlooked and it's kind of allowed. Then that patient will be moved to the treatment center and a paramedic will take over care at that point. They'll be transferred to a paramedic unit and taken to the hospital.
Gotcha.
So MCIs are because they're very fluid situations and we have to allow for some sort of, and it's also typically why you won't see paramedics doing triage. Believe it or not, best people to do triage, EMTs. Are they gonna live? They have life-sustaining injuries, or are they dead?
Yeah.
Tag them, let the medics be over in the treatment area where they can help the most amount of people. So, EMTs are fantastic triagers. They do the best at triaging and determining who can be helped and who can't. So, make sense?
Yeah.
So, okay. Good Samaritan law, am I forgetting anything? No, I'm not. Good Samaritan laws, these are grant immunity from liability if a rescue or an accident in good faith within level of training. From what I can find, I believe as a licensed medical provider in Vermont, you are not covered under Good Samaritan laws.
Correct.
Because you know better.
Yep.
If kind of comes down to, this story is like years and years. This is probably a 15, 20-year-old story, but 2 paramedics in New York C-sectioned a female that was pregnant to term. They performed a C-section because she was decapitated.
I think it would.
They
That's still-
performed a C-section outside of scope of practice
Yeah.
to save the baby because the baby was still viable. They saved the baby. Both of them lost their license because they're not covered under. If a normal person said, "Hey, I saw this on Grey's Anatomy," and did it, they'd probably be covered under Good Samaritans because they acted in the best interest of that baby, fetus, whatever you want to call it.
If it's the same one I'm thinking of, I think it was Montana, and I think they were stuck on a mountain pass.
Was it Montana? I thought it was New York. I'd heard, but again, I heard this back in my EMT class 14 years ago. So they lost their license for it. They were not covered under the Good Samaritan laws due to they know better. They know medical procedures. They know it. Did they do the right thing? My vote, yes, 100%. But I think they actually ended up like suing the state, and I think they ended up actually regaining their licensing after going through a whole court battle and stuff. But again, this was quite a long time ago. But I bring it up just to be as a point of we know better. We know medical. We know things. So we're kind of not. We're not covered under this.
They also probably knew it was going to happen too. They, you know, what I mean, they didn't perform the C-section and be like, I'm probably gonna, like, they did it. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. They knew they were going to lose their job. They knew they were going to get in trouble for doing it.
Nope.
No, yeah.
Because you could argue all day long that they felt they had a duty to act in the best interest of the only viable patient.
Yeah. Which I think is how they ended up winning the court case, and I think they regained their license if I remember correctly. I'll have to look it up and dig back into it, but
Vermont's Good Samaritan laws, at least, cover good intentions
yeah.
and ignorance. But once you surpass ignorance, then you have to fall back on training. So if I'm a nurse practitioner stuck at a scene, I can't behave like a surgeon.
Right.
Like, you have to be within your own bounds.
Once you get licensed to a medical license, like you're kind of above ignorance at that point, correct?
Yeah.
Is that the kind of the way to look at it?
Yeah,
So,
it's kind of like you said, you know better. It's you know the law,
right.
and you also know what you are trained for, and you know you're outside of both.
Yeah.
And so you're not ignorant, you're not acting in good faith at that moment because you know you're violating kind of scope of practice what you're allowed to do.
Yeah.
And if you know, then it's not covered.
You can't have like a family member go after you if they saw that you were just standing there doing nothing and go after you with a lawsuit or whatever for not doing anything. They can't do that, right?
Nope.
You can instruct a bystander. That is
The other thing, well, the other thing you can do, so in this situation, if they weren't on a mountain pass or whatnot, so one thing that you could do is, well, it'd be hard at the EMT level. When you get to the advanced level or paramedic, once this is gone, you can see which tube is which very easily. So it'd be very easy to put a breathing tube in it, pump the chest, breathe for the patient, and rush them to the hospital where they can do a C-section. You just keep as much,
Keep them alive.
basically keep them alive is basically keep the blood away, keep the blood flowing to the baby, and rush them to the hospital as fast as you can and let them perform the C-section. That's one option you could do, but. I think we are kind of talked about all this. Talked about confidentiality. Anything a patient tells you, remember, it's covered under HIPAA. Privacy rule, so it's the privacy rule of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Become familiar with this. Yeah.
What if a patient confesses to you that they killed somebody? Is that covered?
What?
Like a patient confesses that they just killed somebody.
Ah.
That's not a
It's
medical
not-
thing.
I wouldn't
That's
think so.
admission of guilt.
I don't.
Because then you're just as guilty if you don't report it.
No,
I want to say it's not covered under it's not a medical.
It's not, because you're talking about a third person.
If I
I'm
can,
treating you and you just tell me you just killed him.
it falls
He's in the other room, that's
under
no longer a medical issue.
Yeah.
mandated reporter.
Yeah.
So like, ignore everything else. If they've harmed somebody, that falls under mandated reporter.
Yeah. I was gonna say that sounds about. So yeah, you would be able to report that without breaching HIPAA.
Like depending on how long, I'm just saying in general, wouldn't depend on statute of limitations on how long ago it
There's
happened.
no statute of
There's no-
limitations on capital murder.
Yeah.
Also,
Murder has no statute of limitation.
Also, if you're not an attorney and you're not familiar with the statute of limitations, you are still required to report.
Yeah.
It is not your job to determine whether or not it is a crime. It is your job to report what you know that might be a crime,
Yeah.
especially if it reaches that level.
But as a third party or as a first responder?
Yes. Well, as a first responder, you're a mandated reporter, but
Yeah.
you should always be reporting attempted murders, confessions of guilt, so maybe somebody.
Well, it's redundant.
And you also put it in you'd also put that something in your report too.
Yeah.
So it's on a written legal record.
And you said the first week, it's like, as an EMT, AEMT, paramedic, everything, by state law, Vermont state law, you're an obligated reporter.
Yeah,
If
that's
somebody
what
just
she
gave
said.
somebody a thump on the head and killed them, well, guess what?
Right.
Yeah, it's done reporting. Whether it be two weeks old or 200 years. it doesn't matter.
And that comes into if it's third person information required or direct first person information required. If it's third party information, so the neighbor, I'm at a patient scene and the neighbor comes over and says, oh hey, somebody told me that Josie went and killed Alice, a year ago over there. Third party information like that is not mandated by us to
You can-
report.
You
It
can
has to
put
be
that in a
direct
report, pass that on to
information.
law enforcement, then you can do an investigation.
Yes.
That because, yes, it is according to.
So HIPAA kind of shared among other healthcare personnel that are part of the patient's continuing care. So if a patient's sister calls up and says, I'm a nurse, you need to tell me what's going on. Well, no, I don't. Well, I'm a nurse, I'm allowed to know. No, you're not, because you're not part of this patient's healthcare team.
If you're a nurse, you probably know why.
So, and as a nurse, they should know that, you'd be surprised. So the only people that you're allowed to tell are people that are involved in the care of that patient. So the doctors and nurses taking care of them. By the letter of the law with HIPAA, coming back to the station and talking about a patient amongst your crew members, about other crew members that were not on the call, is a violation of HIPAA.
I mean, if you're using that information as a patient like Joe Smith from 115 Main Street or something like that, but you say, hey, this particular situation under this, we did this, that's more like a debriefing.
Yeah, you're still sharing patient information.
Date of birth out though.
Even if they're not using
Right.
it,
Even if-
stuff like that?
You can use it as a situation, but you can't give patient identifier
Right, no
information.
name, no
Yeah.
addresses, no
Right.
telephone number.
No, nothing.
Right.
The problem is, everybody here
Yeah.
Knows where.
we
everybody-
know where every crew is going.
Right.
Just with the way our systems are linked, like when he gets a call, I know where he's going on it comes to my phone and say, oh, he's going to this and this address. I know who that is.
Gotcha. Well,
So,
just, I mean, then what's the difference between like you talking about your patient that was having a heart attack when he knew where it was?
I only knew that was in
So-
Georgia, I didn't know
Right,
specifics.
he doesn't know the individual, he just knows, so we went through a whole QA, QI process,
Yep.
and that's what you guys will do, so there's no patient identifiers to that, it's just basically the nature of the call.
Gender and age is all you're gonna get.
Yeah.
Right. Your
Gender,
gender,
age, or not,
specific
yeah.
name, date of birth, that kind of stuff, that
Okay.
all sticks with that crew.
Gotcha.
And using scenarios without patient identifiers for training purposes is allowed.
So what if
So-
we go on a call, and then, like, so I've gone on a call, and now I get back to the station, and this person has gone on that same call, but not at the same time. I mean, they've also gone to this address, and they know the patient, and they're asking questions. Because they've previously transported this patient at a different time.
Technically, no, each case, I believe,
It's separate.
I believe each case is considered separate.
The street scene question.
Unless it has a benefit to the patient's care, so not really in our
I
situation,
believe
it
you're right, I
plays no
believe it
benefit.
is, that question.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with the healthcare team, like the patient's caseworker or something like that, who's directly involved with the patient's care, then that would be beneficial. He would be going against
For-
HIPAA.
For the most part, in EMS, we tend to come back from our calls, especially if you work for a service that has multiple crews on, like we do here. You come back and we do talk about calls. It happens. We do it more in a training sort of thing, like, hey, just FYI, if you go here, like this page, like this person's got really bad CHF, so just FYI, if you go there, it's bad. It's really bad. We typically do that for, it's more of a, trying to make sure our people are in the know. It's not, we don't do it to,
It's to provide better patient care.
to provide better patient care. We're not doing it to sell information. We're not going out on the street going, Mrs. Smith has really bad CHF! Or we're coming back to the station going, Mrs. Rich is the biggest bitch in the world. Like, we're not coming back sharing information like that, shouting it to the rooftops. The reason we share the information is we're sharing it for training and to make sure we're better prepared for patient care. Because it's not always the same people that go to calls here.
And it comes down to scene safety too. Because if I go to a call that I know Joe went to a week ago and they have a big Rottweiler that attacks me, Joe didn't say anything about that beforehand. Joe and I are gonna have words.
So, again, best bet, if you're unsure, don't share patient information. And that's the base thing. If a cop wants to know something and it's privileged, tell them that you're gonna have to get a subpoena. It's the best way to handle that. Medical identification bracelets, I think, has everyone seen those before? Yeah, everyone's familiar with them. So, they're great things to look for. They're necklaces, they're bracelets, they're even coming, people will get them as, actually will get tattoos now. Like a lot of times they'll, on the chest, on the forearms and wrist area, hands typically was where you'll see them. You might even see it as like a necklace, like a tattoo necklace down. So just keep an eye out for those kind of things. Can alert you to a lot of things that are going on with the patient that they may not be able to tell you.
Well, those actually helped you once.
Yes, they did actually diagnose, what I thought was
Addison's
Graves,
disease.
no, it was Graves' disease.
Graves' disease.
Yeah.
So those definitely help with saving patients' lives. Look for them, especially
So-
if the patient's unresponsive.
Patient was not having a adrenal insufficiency issue, but the doc still gave me kudos for giving hydrocortisone for. She's like, it ain't gonna hurt the person because they're sick and they need it. So,
So always
yeah,
be
it
on
actually
the
did
lookout.
help. It did actually help with a case I had just a couple years ago, actually.
So this may not be needed, but what's the, is that just like a serial number on the bottom?
I believe it's like a medical record number.
Oh.
So,
Also with people's phones now too, on the lock screen, medical ID information, you can get to that too.
yep. Just some other special situations for medical identification devices. necklace, braces, cards. Conditions can include heart conditions, allergies, diabetes, epilepsies. Ooh, actually, devices. What's a new diabetic device you might see patients with? That might clue you in.
Oh, it's
The
the,
little things that they
Oh,
stick on.
Stick on things there?
Yep, and the insulin pumps.
Yep.
They'll wear them here on their belts. Look for those. That's a definitely good key indicator that someone's got diabetes. And their sugar's probably low if they're unconscious. Organ donors, just another kind of thing. See you later. Organ donors, it is a legal document obviously allowing patients to donate organs and tissues in the event of death. Some patients may have a card in their wallet. Their license, the back of the license will, driver's licenses typically state whether they're an organ donor or not. So keep an eye out for things like that. Family members may have the paperwork saying they're an organ donor. Just a second, I will get to you. I can see you have a comment to make or question. If you run into an issue like this and the patient is dead and they are a organ donor and they are viable organ donor, contact medical direction. Most likely what they're going to ask you to do is start CPR and transport the patient as urgently as you can to the hospital. CPR will help keep the organs going, will help give them blood, help them, and hopefully as soon as we get to the hospital, they'll probably take them to surgery and harvest the organs. So as much as they can viably. So make sure if they do present you with this information, make sure you let the hospital know. Go ahead.
so kind of comes back to consent. If you have a 16-year-old in a car crash, their DOA, their license has organ donor on it, and their parents do not want them to be organ donors, and you're transporting, parents are on scene.
We'll let the hospital.
But if it's
Medical-
Trying to have a license
You're
and
not
sign for
gonna,
them.
you're not gonna dissect them right there anyways.
No,
Take it
but
to the
it
hospital.
will change care, so it matters.
Yeah, but
It does. She's not wrong. She's
No,
right.
but like
It brings up a question because you're talking about a minor.
if they're under 18 and it's on their license anyway, chances are the parents already signed the consent.
Can you-
didn't they?
Parents
Can you
do not-
consent to being an organ donor under 18 though?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That changes my answer.
When I got my license,
They wouldn't let me, my parents had to sign.
Well, I think we.
Your parents had to sign off on it?
Yeah, one of them.
Oh.
see, mine didn't, and that was the question that we raised there, and they basically said it's up to the individuals on scene. So
Well,
it's
you
always
say-
been an interesting question for me. If their minor is deceased, they've chosen me an organ donor. Parents on scene, they might have consented at the time, but they're now refusing.
The body's still gonna be transported to medical
It
exam.
still
Yeah, but
matters.
But we're not
continuity
transporting a dead body
here.
from scene. That body's staying there till the medical examiner comes and gets the
Later
body.
on.
Right, but I'm just saying, it's like, again, and she's got a great point, but I'm just saying is that, yeah, mom and dad say, no, you're not gonna take my son's heart out and everything, even though he has it on his license. Let them sort it out because the medical examiner's gonna become involved and then.
But it's too late to harvest
Too
organs
late.
by then.
Well, I mean.
You're on a organs from the time of death to harvesting organs, it's a very, very small window.
Yeah.
Like you need to be to the hospital within, I think it's less than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
They have to harvest those
Oh, Jesus, we
organs.
were at.
So it's a pretty small window.
Well, I don't think it's gonna create any probably moral, issues with you guys. It's like if it comes down and some kid doesn't get a heart because these parents didn't want, that's on their moral.
I mean,
Have you ever?
you can play the guilt card. I said earlier, don't lie to patients. I didn't say you couldn't guilt them. So you can always play the guilt card.
Have you ever done this?
What, guilt card?
No.
No, Harry.
Like
I get guilted all the time.
no, like transport someone because they're an organ donor. Because like
I have not.
I'm thinking of where we are in Enosburg.
Yeah.
You know,
There's no way.
we're 10 minutes to a call most of the time.
Yeah.
You're going to assess. It's going to be a few minutes. Transport time's at least 20 to the hospital. You're at 30 right there. It's
The 30, when I say the 30 minutes, that's a guess on my part. I don't remember what the specific time on organs. I just know it is a very small window
Yeah.
to maintain, to get those organs out.
Parents
They gotta put a
consent
team
for
together
you
anyway.
To be an organ donor?
So,
To harvest.
again, in that,
I'm gonna have to.
And does that what?
I'll
You
have to
freeze
look that back up.
right.
'Cause I got mine, they did.
Though I do believe, though, any surgeon, like up here, like a surgeon could do, like a general surgeon could do a
Well,
organ.
that equipment to store.
Huh?
Do they have the equipment to store?
Yes, they should, yeah. Because those things are probably gonna be, they're gonna have, if they know that an organ donor is coming in, they're gonna probably notify the required people. So that heart's gonna have, they're probably gonna have a helicopter here,
Oh, I'm
or
sure, yeah.
they're gonna have those hearts sent down to probably Boston, UVM, wherever they can send them like that. Again, I don't know specifically, but I think every hospital is supposed to have like an organ, like, what do they call them, a collection team? If not, I think it's something they can alert, I think UVM, and I think UVM might actually send a collection team up via HealthNet.
They did a skin donate. I went and got a body at the Northwest about a month ago. They called the team up because she had her skin hurt. She donated her skin, but they had to call somebody out. They didn't.
Yeah.
The people weren't from here.
Yeah, I think probably UVM
Probably they came up and did it. And then we just
So, sorry,
Yes.
sorry. What would happen if one parent said it was okay and the other parent said it wasn't okay? And your parents are separated?
That's
So
a battle.
battle.
That's a legal battle.
That's a legal battle waiting to happen.
Yeah, they're not probably not gonna be left together in the same car with an accident.
It's one of those things where, I mean, you see it, it's been presented in TV shows before, I think with like House and ER and things like that, but typically we're dealing with in-hospital patients at that time, so like a patient's already on life support. So the patient can be maintained on life support for, quite a while, and those organs can be maintained viable through life support. So the battle can go to the courts, and a court can decide which parent is making the best decision for the patient, and blah, 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 that sort of stuff. But in the field, it's probably going to have to be, they're going to have to come to some sort of mutual decision on that case.
So I just looked it up. In Vermont, you do need parental consent
Oh,
to
perfect.
be an organ donor.
Okay.
It's
So
either
a parent
different-
can revoke the consent.
I would think so.
So, just remember that too. Consent can always be withdrawn. It's not fun. It's happened. We had a psych jump out of the interstate, out of the ambulance on the interstate.
Because you decided that was it.
Yep.
Didn't want
Freaked out, said didn't want to go, jumped out. Luckily they were at like standstill traffic, but
Yeah.
I have a question when it comes to DNR.
yeah.
Okay, this is a long time ago. My son died of a brain tumor. He had a DNR on his hand, on his wrist. He was with his mom. His mom was just freaking out of it. Okay, this was in Oregon. I was in Arizona at the time. Paramedics called me up. The ones who responded, was asking me about everything and all that. And I said, well, he should have his DNR on his hand. And anyways, can they do that? I mean, just like call the other parent if they're in another state and ask for information, all that stuff?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just.
I mean, are they getting information, or are they asking you for permission to do something like that the mother's selling that's contradicting you?
Well, he had a DNR, and like I said, the mom didn't even answer anything. And they didn't ask me to resuscitate. I'm like, no, he should have a DNR thing on.
So they're just looking for clarifying information.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Even
Yeah,
if
they
they're
can
in
call
another
you.
state, they can do that?
Yeah. Because they're just calling you for information. They're not
Right.
calling you for permission. I mean, even if they.
Sorry, that was loud.
What the hell was that? Even if they were looking for permission to treat, say it wasn't for the death there, if it was just looking for like if your wife couldn't make, or your ex-wife, I'm assuming at the time, if she was hysterical to the point that she couldn't make a decision, they could call you and you could go, yes, transport him to the hospital, and they could get your permission because she's unable to make a logical decision. So they're reaching out to the other parent to make a logical decision. So yes, you can get verbal consent like that in another state from a parent.
Okay.
So, safe haven laws. Does anyone know what the safe haven laws are? Yeah.
Just dumping off a kid in front of a freaking fire department, police department, the questions asked.
Yep. You are allowed to ask specific questions. You're allowed to ask basically healthcare questions. Does the child have any medical needs? It's about really all you're allowed to ask. So you can't ask like, why are you dumping them? Where you can ask, does the patient have any special medical needs?
Actually, in Vegas, they allowed it to where you can just dump off. You can, not meaning it in this manner. You can actually drop off the child and walk away.
So in Vermont, you can. I believe it has to be handed off to a provider. I don't believe they can just drop off at the door.
I don't know.
So I would actually question that because fire departments are not allowed to be locked because they're safe haven centers.
You know, we're a safe haven center too, but our front door is locked.
Ours is locked too.
Yeah, we're not allowed.
Every fire department I know of locks their
We're
doors,
not allowed
especially
to lock
volunteer
ours.
departments.
How can you draw?
We're not allowed.
Now, that may be from the select board, but we're not
So
allowed to
that's
lock
probably
ours.
it.
Oh, we're locked up tighter than fire.
I was always told that someone had to be present to take possession of the child. You couldn't ask questions.
We're missing a Halligan
You could ask medical, you could ask medical. You know what, I'll tell you what, in between classes, between now and Thursday, I will verify all the information with the Safe Haven law, and I will bring them back Thursday night too, so we can be very clear on this. Because it is actually a very
Pretty
big
sure
deal with
that
that
we
stuff.
left some holes.
It is the same thing when they're vague.
people there.
You cannot, you have to,
On the
you can give the child
Oh,
to
that's
someone,
fair, that's fair.
but you don't have to answer any questions.
Right,
Yeah.
That's how it is over there.
yeah, same here. But you do have, as a medical provider, you can ask if the child has medical conditions. But that's about it, that's the limit of what you can ask.
I
Yeah,
still
we have
think
people
that'd
there.
be kind of sketchy though, still.
But anyway, I will look up the Safe Haven law, I will get all the details to it, I should have done it today, I
Get into it, the office.
guess I thought I knew it more than I did, but apparently I don't, so I'll look it up and we'll bring it back.
So we always have people there, they're just hammered or.
And nobody knows it's there.
Right,
That's child endangerment.
They're not on
Right.
the
That's
permit.
crime.
so that's the only thing, so,
You know,
that's what I always thought, but I will look it up, I will clarify everything, and I'll bring it back Thursday, does that sound good?
Yeah.
Perfect. Crime scenes, anyone ever been to a crime scene?
Oh, yeah.
Just be careful when you do. Like, I know patient care kind of comes first for us, but that doesn't mean that we can't be professionally considerate of the police and try to step over blood pools. You know, don't walk through them. If it looks like it's fluid and you probably shouldn't step in it, step over it. Walk around. You know, make sure you're not touching anything. If you do touch anything or move anything, make sure you alert the police. Like, hey, I had to move the bed. I had to throw the mattress over here to get to the patient. So it was right here, but I threw it over that way. So they know. Sometimes cops don't always get there to get the pictures in before we get there, especially if a patient's in critical need.
That's what the fire department's supposed to be there for, to mess it up.
We do that. So just do your best to preserve what evidence you can. Let's talk about cutting. So examples of evidence. Document the condition of the scene. Just FYI, if you do go to this, you want to document all this because most likely your run is going to get subpoenaed. So make sure you're documenting the condition of the scene, the condition and state where you found the patient, how they were laying, where their arms, legs, how they, they're laying like this on the bed, or how were they? Make sure you document all that. If you do leave a footprint and you accidentally do step in blood or whatnot, make sure you document that. Make sure you can also tell the police officers. And then microscopic evidence. That's where with DNA, so that's where clothing's going to come into a big part of it. So preservation of evidence. Remember what you touch, minimize your impact, and work with the police.
Don't the police usually like take your gloves and stuff anyways, and stuff like that?
They don't usually take your gloves, no. Just because your gloves aren't going to leave any fingerprints to anything. So that prevent you from leaving fingerprints. The biggest thing I can tell you with crime scenes, if you go to a patient that gets stabbed, okay, when we talk about trauma later in the class and stuff, we're going to talk about trauma naked. It's a common term you're going to hear. Trauma patients get trauma naked. That means all clothing, cut right off. Okay? When we cut clothes, we're pretty indiscriminate with how we cut clothes. We usually grab a pant leg and we just start cutting. Or we grab the shirt and we start cutting. When it comes to a crime, be meticulous with your cutting. If you have a stab wound here, maybe you cut over here. Try to stay at least 3 to 4 inches away from any sort of stab wound, bullet hole, or any hole like that in a patient's clothing. Because that's evidence. So just try to be mindful of that stuff when you go. So, like I said, and then police are going to want that stuff. So make sure you put that clothing in a place where it can be collected as evidence after. So some ambulances, I don't believe we're required to, but some ambulances do carry brown paper bags. So you can always put that stuff in a brown paper bag. Don't put it in a plastic bag. OB kits sometimes have brown paper bags in them. So, because when you deliver the placenta, it goes into there for genetic testing. We kind of talked about this special reporting requirements. Child, elderly, domestic abuse, human trafficking, violence. We talked about sexual assault, and then situations where restraint may be necessary. we kind of hit on all these things as we've been talking along here with your guys' questions and discussion tonight. Again, intoxicated person with injuries, mentally incompetent. We kind of hit on all this stuff. I'm not going to bore you guys with rehashing a ton of stuff all the time. Other ethical responsibilities. So morality. We all have our morality. We all judge things differently. What my morals are different than all of your guys's and different than Garrett's. So you need to know what your version of right and wrong, but you also have to understand everybody else has a different definition and a different moral, including our patients, including the doctors we work with, the nurses, the police officers. So we have to understand that everyone's going to have a difference. Ethics, standard of behavior for a profession, ethics, I think ethics are a big part of everything except for politics. Just kidding.
It's debatable.
Actually, never mind. But just remember, ethics are a big part. Like, some people will think something's an ethical behavior, or you might not think it. You're going to run into these situations probably on a daily basis when you're on a truck and doing things. You're going to run into these ethical decisions and ethical dilemmas. I really don't know. Just beyond, like, when you're talking about expectations as an EMT, be honest. Be honest in your reporting. If you screwed up, report it. It's perfectly okay. Guess what? I screw up daily. I've been hauled in the office multiple times for different things. For doing something I shouldn't have done. Or misinterpreting a protocol. Own it. Own it as an EMT. You make I'm not going to say if you make a mistake. I'm going to say when you make a mistake. Own it, because it's going to happen. You're going to make a mistake.
You're going to be
Just
in more
own it.
trouble if you lie about it.
Yep,
Don't
trust
ever
me.
lie about it.
In this business, in the medical field, you lie about a mistake, you will be in more trouble instead of just coming out and being honest about it.
It's the quickest way to lose your license.
Refrain from actions that cause harm to a patient. There's that famous saying of do no harm and know no harm. Or do no harm and do no harm. It's just the way it's spelled. It's different, spelled out differently if you look at it. Know what harm is and do no harm. And when it comes down to it, always work to help the patient. Make the patient your priority in your care. Make sure that they're feeling like they're a goddess when you take care of them. That's the way you want to make a patient feel.
Unless they're a politician and they have a DNR on already on.
Better make sure of that. They might have to run for re-election.
You're going to catch a lot of flack for that this semester.
Oh, I expect and am prepared.
Nothing but a little tattoo can't work out.
Again, respect the right of adult patients. Respect people that they can make their own decisions, that you may not agree with it, you may not agree with it, but they have a right to their own decisions in their own life, just like you guys. Live and let live. Treat all patients fair and justly. Do I need to say more about that? Like, don't. Assist others to learn your profession. Once you guys get all trained up, once we get you guys to be the best, brightest EMTs that have ever walked the face of Vermont, like, take your knowledge, take your teachings, teach the next generation of EMTs. Report misconduct. I think this is a huge recurring theme with police departments we're seeing across the country right now. It's really coming to the limelight. I think everyone here has probably known this shit happens, pardon my language, for years. And it's always been, don't. If you see something that shouldn't happen, report it. Simple as that. None of us here are out to hurt anybody.
Even if it's your superior.
Yeah.
If you're seeing something wrong that's being done and it's detrimental to the patient, it's your duty to report that.
And the last one here, make sure research is approved. So, medical field research, the medical field is very dynamic, always changing. Research is going on all over the place. Yeah, from the EMT level all the way up through the best of the best doctors. They're researching EMS things and treatments and better ways that we can take care of it, to the better ways to do surgeries. Reports come out, research comes out. Just make sure if you read that research, just make sure that it's like,
Not from Wikipedia?
it's not from Wikipedia. It's not from Wikipedia. It comes from a proper journal, like the New England Journal of Medicine, the American Heart Association's another one that things. What are some of the other journals? The American Journal of Surgeons.
Yep.
There's the Emergency Doc Journal.
Association of Orthopedic Surgeons.
Yeah.
Trauma surgeons.
There's so many journals out there that publish papers from doctors from all the research that they do on specific cases. Read those papers. They're fantastic to read. They'll really give you really want to learn a bunch of like medical terminology and go, my head hurts from reading that. Read those. But you learn a lot from them. It's pretty cool. I read through that stuff all the time on transfers. Read through all like the CT reports and the imaging reports and stuff. It's great. It's great learning to learn about the different like vessels in the head from CT scans and stuff. So I encourage you guys to read that stuff, and I encourage you guys to do your own little research on your own time. If you find a subject that you like, I encourage you to do that. All right, we're going to skip the chapter review because I think we've talked enough about this stuff. All right, let's take, wow, it's 8 o'clock already?
Yeah.
Holy shit. Let's take 5. We still got to do lifespan development. We'll speed through that, but let's take like 5-10 minutes. We're going to try and speed through this best we can. Anyone that's in here that's ever had kids has probably experienced all of this firsthand. So the different brackets of lifespan. Infancy, toddlers, preschool, school age, adolescence, early adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood. Infancy. Infancy is considered birth to 1 year. You know, why is she cute? Typically, they're going to be anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 pounds ish, unless you're my brother who is over 9 pounds. They're going to double in weight about 6 months, triple by 12. Big thing with kids, remember their head makes up a huge portion of their body weight. And it's also very disproportionate to the rest of their body. So this is going to come into play. Keep this in mind. This is going to be a big thing when we start talking about airway. Once we start talking about airway respirations, this whole idea of the physiological changes between infants and adults is going to play a big role. Your airways are narrow, short, easily obstructed. Your nose and diaphragm is what we obviously breathe with. I don't know why they put that under infancy. That's kind of what we all do.
Just a big point on there. So we talk about a lot of pounds. You got to learn the conversion to kilograms at some point.
2.2.
2.2.
Yep.
That's hard to do out in your head really quick.
No, but
So-
if you just do 2, then it gets you close.
Yeah.
There's
So
very quick methods to do it. I have my own method.
100
We'll go over that.
I do too. I was taught, so 100-pound person, divide it in 2 to 50, take 10% 50, take 10% of 50 and take it off 50, so 45 kilos.
That's the quick way.
That's kind of the quick way I do it. It gets you
Real close.
real close. I've never had it give me, I've never done it to the point where I've been off on medication dosages.
And when
At
you
least
get
enough to
report
get
to
me
the
in trouble.
hospital and stuff, they don't want pounds, they want kilos.
All medication, and you'll learn this later when we get into pharmacology, all medications are done in kilograms. They're all weight-based by
What if your
kilograms.
patient's not responsive?
Pretty
Just
sure our
guess.
rig has it.
Yeah, you do your best guess.
The chart.
Yeah.
As a kid, we actually have we'll go over that, we have a Broslow tape that will actually measure out, based on their length, how much that kid should weigh. Sometimes you gotta go one way or the other. When you get to adults, you're just ballparking your best guess.
We'll grab a Broslow tape. We'll show them real quick. We'll get deep into the Broslow tape later, but we'll at least show it to you all. So infancy antibodies are passed from mother to child, obviously during pregnancy, and then also through breastfeeding. Moral reflex, so other physiological things with infants. Moral reflex, which is a startle reflex. They'll typically throw their arms out, they spread their fingers, they're going to grab with their fingers and their arms. Then you have the palmar reflex, which is where they're going to grasp things with their palm. And then the rooting reflex is when they're actually going to turn their cheek to the side when they're hungry. So if you like rub their cheek, they're going to turn it to the side. That's called the rooting reflex. It typically means that infant's hungry. That also goes along with the sucking reflex. That if you stroke an infant's lips and they start the sucking motion, it's another kind of goes along with the whole rooting reflex. Sucking reflex kind of go together.
know these terms because this will be on your quiz. I pretty much guarantee that.
Sleep patterns, little typo, it's supposed to be 8 to 16 hours, not 16 to 8 hours throughout the day and night. It'll soon change to 4 to 6 during the day and then 9 to 10 at night. By 2 to 4 months, they'll be sleeping through the night. Keep in mind these are generalized terms. If you're a parent, you probably might have experienced different numbers. These are just generalizations. Extremities grow in length. Obviously from the growth, they have growth plates at the end of all their long bones, so that causes them to grow. That's why breaks along that growth plate are very bad in kids.
Yep.
The fontanelles, they're not fused at birth. That's why kids typically will have a very soft skull. They don't fuse for quite a while. The anterior fontanelle doesn't close for 9 to 18 months after birth, so quite a while. They have sunken fontanelles, so if you notice that kind of like sunken feeling in the head, it's a sign of dehydration in a kid or in an infant. If they're bulging, it's actually a sign of increased pressure inside their skull. So could be from multiple different causes. Typically they're psychosocial, bonding. They sense that their needs need to be met. They desire an orderly, predictable environment. Infants like that order. They like the predictability. They want to know exactly when they're going to be fed. They're going to learn by building on what they know, what's already known. So again, that goes to the order. So they know they get fed when they wake up. That kind of goes to the whole scaffolding of learning. Their temperament's going to be very reactive to their environment. They're not going to really understand their environment too much. It's going to be more of a reaction. So toddlers is your 12 to 36 months phase. Cute little guy. He has an older sibling. He's about to get the whole from the kink.
Yeah.
Then he looks to the end of the house and they open it up, yeah.
Yep.
Joe, do you want me to pass this around?
Sure. I'll just bring it up here. So this is the Bravo tape. Well, like I said, we'll talk about this more in depth when we get to that kind of stuff, but it's a length base. Put the top at the head, and then you stretch it out to the bottom, wherever the bottom of the feet come, and we'll pass it around. You can kind of take a look at it. And each different of the colors there, it'll show like tube sizes for that thing, drug dosages, so you don't have to do math in your head at 3 o'clock in the morning. Gives a whole bunch of other stuff. Normal vitals for that age group, things like that. So
everything.
And then you just go like one way or the other one if
Yeah, so if it seems like a larger child to their age, then we may go a little above. If they're smaller, lower development, that kind of stuff, and we'll go a little low.
So toddlers, we start to see kind of a body temperature range from about 98 to 99.6. You get that fluctuation. They're going to gain about 4 pounds a year. Body systems start to improve in their efficiency. This is where we're going to start to see a drop in pulse rates. They're going to start dropping down to maybe the low 100s to 120s, things like that. Respirations will be like between 20 and 30. So we're going to start seeing normalization of systems. They haven't quite hit what adult normal is, but they're starting to become more efficient in their body systems. We start to see the lung systems grow out, the nervous system starts to grow out more. They start to develop that fine motor skill, being able to do that fine motor. Their brains actually reached about 90% of the adult weight at this point. So their brain's about done growing. And then we obviously get some muscle mass, bone density increasing with kids or with the toddlers. Immune system, they become more susceptible to illnesses at this age. Why do we think so? Why do you think so?
That's when they start building it?
Exactly. They don't really have an immune system at this age.
Yeah.
They haven't been exposed to anything. They haven't built up immunities to anything other than what mom's given them through antibodies. Also, we also will start seeing some immunity develop to certain things through their vaccinations. Primary teeth come in at this time around 36 months, and then toilet training comes in about a year to 30 months. They're physically capable of it at 12 to 15 months, but not psychologically ready for until a year and a half to 30 months. They start to understand words They understand the cause and effect that if I do this, this is going to hurt. They start to develop some separation anxiety, so being separated from mom and dad, doing their first overnights with their cousins. You know, they start getting that kind of that anxiety, that separation. They don't want to be away from mom and dad. It's safe. This is where we start seeing them use their imaginations, the magic thinking. They start play acting and playing with action figures and dolls and, you know, dump trucks in the sandbox and things like that. And they start to master some language basics. Preschool. Again, systems are going to continue to develop. We're going to start seeing a drop in respiration rate, pulse rate. Things are becoming more efficient. So we start to see that closer look to an adult. Psychosocial, this is where they're going to start developing their social skills. This is where they're going to go to preschool. They're going to start meeting other kids, learning how to interact with other kids and other people. What's right, what's wrong, some of that starts to start taking place. On to school age, 6 to 12 years old. Body temperatures, then we start to see a little bit bigger of a range with body temperature in this age group. We start seeing that 98 to 101.3. Weight gains increase. Obviously, they continue to grow. This is where they start losing their teeth, getting their adult teeth. It's also when parents tend to start spending less time with their child, giving them a little bit more general supervision instead of giving them the attention all the time. You're going to start seeing them develop their decision-making process. They're going to start making decisions for themselves and wanting to make decisions for themselves. We also start, towards the later grasps of this age group, we start seeing the self-esteem. This is where popularity, rejection, emotional support, neglect, all this will start affecting the child's social behavior and emotional behavior. We also start seeing more moral reasoning. So they start to really kind of develop that right and wrong. Adolescence. He's a cool kid. He's out in the snow with a snowboard with jeans. So we typically see a rapid growth spurt in these guys. Usually 2 to 3 years. Females will typically stop growing around 16 years of age. Men typically around will be about 18 when they stop growing. We also reach our sexual maturity and secondary sexual development occurs. So keep in mind too, when it comes to, we'll talk more about this, when it comes to CPR and the algorithms for basic life support and everything, the AHA recognizes the pubescent signs. So for males, if they have hairy armpits, they have hair in their groin. Same females have breast development. That means they've crossed over from being considered a pediatric in the AHA's eyes to an adult. So if you have someone that's 14 years old, a female that's 14 years old, and they are unconscious without a pulse and stuff, and they have that 14-year-old girl has breasts, they are considered an adult, and they fall under the adult algorithm.
And that changes because their drug dosages, the amount of joules we're going to shock with, all that stuff changes based on their development stage.
So just keep that in mind. In this term, it's 13 to 18. You're not an adult till 18, but in the AHA's eyes, when it comes to CPR and stuff like that, puberty is the cutoff from child to adult. They're going to strive for independence. They're really going to become their individual at this time. Body image is a very big concern, how they look. They also start to become prone to self-destructive behaviors. This is where they want to, they want to try dope for the first time. They want to drink alcohol for the first time. This is where those kind of behaviors develop. They also start developing that code of ethics. Early adulthood, which I still qualify for. Yay! Just barely. Just barely. This is where we develop our lifelong habits. We're also in our peak physical condition. Unfortunately, that only occurs between 19 and 26. Your job and family stress levels, they're at the highest they're going to be in your lifetime. Marriage, childbirth, child rearing occur. It's kind of an interesting way to put it, child rearing. I read that and I was just like, That's a very interesting way of having kids.
Having them out.
Accidents are the leading cause of death in this group. Middle adulthood, obviously with adolescence, this is where we really start to see the normalization of vital signs. Respirations start to hit that 12 to 20 mark, our pulse rates hit 60 to 100, our temperature is normal in that 97 to 99 degree. Everybody kind of fluctuates a degree plus or minus. And blood pressure really kind of normalizes, which we'll go into all details of vital signs in a couple weeks. Middle adulthood. Really there's going to be no change in vital signs with these patients. Vision, this is a time where vision correction may be needed. Cancer, high cholesterol, and heart disease, this is that group of the highest subset of patients that we're going to see with these diseases. This is where we're going to see them. Is this 41 to 60 years old. Most heart attacks I think I've picked up have been in the 50s, typically, that we pick up in the field. Weight control becomes more difficult. Body systems are starting to slow down. It's not so easy to shed the weight anymore. There's not so much energy running around the body, so it becomes harder to shed that weight. We're kind of reached that peak, and now we're kind of going back the other way. Body systems become efficient, and then once we kind of hit that peak, they're going to start becoming inefficient again as we get older. Women hit menopause in this stage. Become a little bit more task-oriented instead of goal-oriented. Problems get viewed more as challenges rather than threats. We don't feel threatened. Just give it to him. And they start to become we're in that point where their kids become adults, they're worried about them, but their parents are becoming elderly, and they're worried about them also. And we get to late adulthood, which is 61 years old until you die. I mean, it is. I mean, it says and older, so I mean. Vital signs at this stage are going to be very dependent on your physical condition and the health. If you have a lot of heart problems, then you might have higher than normal blood pressure. You might have a higher than normal pulse rate than you've had. You also might have a lower than normal heart rate because your heart's starting to give out. You can't pump as well, so it starts to slow down because it's just not getting fed. So that's when we start seeing pacemakers and stuff implanted to maintain these heart rhythms, then heart rates. Cardiovascular system becomes less efficient. I would say very inefficient at this point in time. We start seeing congestive heart failure. It's not able to pump the blood around. That's why we start seeing, in the older people, we'll start seeing colder limbs. Feet and hands will start getting very cold on a normal basis. It's because that blood flow is down. Respiratory systems start to deteriorate. We get the increased likelihood of respiratory disorders. This is where a lot of older patients in this category, you're going to see pneumonia. Pneumonia is going to be a very common thing you're going to pick them up for, because that respiratory drive just is not there. And if you're not using your respiratory drive to the fullest effect, pneumonia is very easy to develop. We get endocrine changes. It's going to decrease the metabolism. It kind of goes along with the last one, where the body's just not as efficient as it was. It's not going to produce the drive needed for the everyday life that it used to be. So we start seeing maybe more weight gain. Again, these are generalizations. They're not every patient. I've had 95-year-olds that are in better shape than I am. Sometimes it just happens. You start seeing the sleep-wake cycle gets disrupted. Most older, elderly people is, what time did you get up? Oh, I got up at 4 a.m. this morning. I was still sleeping then. I went to bed at 4 a.m.
Especially patients with sundowners.
Yeah.
Where they get confused on what's considered night and day. You start to see that in this age group.
And then obviously other body systems are going to deteriorate. That's just the natural progression of life. They start getting very worried about psychosocial becomes huge. They're going to face many challenges. Living environment. Where are you going to live? I can't take care of myself. I don't want to go to a nursing home. I don't want to go to assisted living. Where am I going to go? Living becomes a huge thing at this point. Their self-worth. What do I have to live for anymore? You know, they're really kind of searching for that, still wanting to be worth something to their family and friends. Financial burdens. Money becomes a very big issue as we get older. And then obviously being afraid of death and dying. I think everybody probably has that kind of in the back of their mind at any age. That possibility of dying at any time. Yeah.
I think they're invincible.
Any questions on lifespan development? I didn't want this to take forever because it's kind of very. Any questions on anything tonight? Everybody's questioned out? Well, it was a very good discussion tonight, guys. I appreciate all the questions and everything, and we'll pick up on Thursday with Garrett. With Garrett, we'll be doing communication and documentation. I promise, we're almost done with the boring stuff. I promise, we're getting there. Let me start here.